Okay, I know we have two people of color on this stream, Val, but you can't say any slurs. Oh, hey guys, what's up? Welcome to the live stream. I make the same joke all the time. Before we get too started, I thought it would be good if we all went kind of through our, like, just a brief synopsis of how we found, like, A Song of Ice and Fire type of a thing. Because for those who don't know, three out of the four of us are big A Song of Ice and Fire fans. And then one of us is along for the ride, and we're not going to say who is who. But Limburg, do you want to start?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Lindberg. Or for the day, you can call me Melisandre, because I am obviously Red Priestess. Anyway, I discovered A Song of Ice and Fire rather late in life, but I am arguably the biggest nerd here. Basically, I used to read really highbrow literature, like, ooh, literature. I thought fantasy was dumb and for uneducated plebs until one day I met a guy who said I would probably like A Song of Ice and Fire. And he was right. And I read the books obsessively. I read them 2, maybe 3 times per year. They're my comfort read. I know pretty much all the names, and I might fight anyone who has wrong takes about these books. So yeah, That's me. I will curse you with my red fire powers.
Shadow babies. All right. Court, you go ahead and go next.
What's up, y'all? My name is Court. I came across A Song of Ice and Fire. Will is going to hate me through actually the show. And so I actually watched the show all the way through, and I wanted to finish the show before I read the books because I knew that the books would be superior, and I didn't want it to ruin every single experience watching the show, although they ruined it themselves. The books weren't even needed for that. But yeah, no, so I started reading it a year after the show ended when I finally calmed down and I was like ready to get back into the world again, and I've never been the same since. I love the series so much.
Yeah, I love the series too. I found it when I was like, I think 18 or so, and it was really the only books I read for the next 10 years. I would just reread them every once in a while. I really fell in like 4 years ago into reading a lot of the theory and meta behind the books too, and there are books that really have changed how I write myself a lot and think about it, and like I vibe a lot with how Martin writes and how he sees the world, and so it's funny because for those who don't know, because this is going to be going on its own channel, I run a book podcast that this is where my minions, I recruited them from. And on that channel, I was always afraid people were going to get tired of me just relating everything back to A Song of Ice and Fire, because it's like my big touchstone literature. And then I found Lindberg, who is also just a massive nerd. Like, we can have A Song of Ice and Fire conversation and references just all the time. And then the way we got here now is that Court was saying that she was going to do a reread. And I was like, how can I monetize every part of my life? What if we did it as like a show or on YouTube? And that is how we got here now. We're going to be doing a reread of the books. Probably like, we're probably going to take about 6 installments to get through each book. And we'll probably do like about 1 a month. Just because we're all quite busy, and by all, I mean me. And so today we're doing through the second Dany chapter, for those who don't know. But how about we leave it to our most ardent A Song of Ice and Fire fan to explain how she got into the books.
I actually can't read. I thought I was auditioning for the Real Housewives of Winterfell right now. I don't know what's happening.
And that's all the game you brought?
No, I did read the Game of Thrones like more than 10 years ago. I just read the first book. I really liked it. But I was just busy. I was in college, so I never continued with it. But my brother's a big fan, and he talks about it a lot. So through osmosis, I've absorbed it a little bit. And I watched the first 3 seasons of the show and the last one. But yeah. That's it.
For those that don't know, me and Lindbergh are very much not show fans, so we're gonna just be.
I didn't like
this
the
face.
show. That's why I just didn't watch it.
I think you're an even bigger anti-fan than I am, though.
My hate runs
I'll have
deep.
long-winded arguments that I send to Will, like, "Oh, this bit of the show was actually pretty good," and he was like, "No, it's stupid. Why do you think that?"
I probably out of everyone
I have
here,
to defend myself.
I probably out of everyone here have the most like praise for the show, even though I have major issues with it as well, especially after reading the books. I'm like, oh my God.
So if this gets to be a Survivor situation, we know who's leaving first. Okay, so I want to just say that, like, as we're going through the books, we're gonna both criticize and praise them at once, and people kind of have issues with that, especially when you're a fan of a thing. But I think of us more as like scholars of A Song of Ice and Fire. We know a lot about it, but that means both being at home with its faults and its strengths. And so, Lindbergh, do you want to start off with what happens, or you know what? What about a premise for A Song of Ice and Fire for people who don't really remember?
Really remember. Okay. Well, A Song of Ice and Fire starts with the book A Game of Thrones, which takes place 19 years after the big conquest, where the old bloodline was overthrown, the Targaryens were ousted, and the usurper Robert Baratheon took his place on the throne. We start in the north, where the Warden of the North, Eddard Stark, who descends from a long bloodline of kings in the north, has gone out with his family to behead a traitor. And that's where we are.
And what were your initial impressions of this first sixth of the book? Or if you want, I can go first too. I don't mind.
Yeah, you go first, Will. Let the man go first.
Well, it's the most important opinion, and it'll set the tone for the rest of you. Basically, I was kind of surprised reading it again because I've read it kind of intermittently at points, and I've read specific chapters, and me and Lindbergh do a thing where we look at one chapter we like once a month and like break down what we like about it. Like on a prose and sentence to sentence level. And so I'm used to Martin's writing, but reading it all at once was really interesting because I'd kind of forgotten how well paced it is for this first sixth of the book. Like events really move forward quite propulsively. And it's one of the reasons I think, even though this is quite a long book, it's not a book that feels as long as it is, at least for now. I've read a lot of books where the plot just takes forever to get started, or characters are just mired in sitting and thinking and bantering, a la Akatar. But these chapters are so clean and sharp, and I think this is something he kind of loses as the series goes on. But like the plot football is being handed from one character to another in a really organic way that moves things forward. Martin has said in the past that he kind of wishes he had spent a little more time with the Starks as a family unit and exploring that. But this gets the plot started so fast, and you're still getting a strong sense of the characters that I think there's a lot of value in that. Were you surprised by anything, having it being like a new, because you've reread it so many times, did you pick up anything this time, or Lindbergh?
I'll just make clear that most of my rereads are audiobooks. I work in a way that lets me digest audiobooks at a frightening pace. So rereading this in written form for the first time in a couple of years actually does a lot. I really think you're onto something, Will, where the plot and the introduction of the plot is treated kind of like we're viewing a TV series, and this is the pilot. And what do you need to do with the pilot? You need to introduce the intrigue quickly. You need to hook the reader right away. So each scene kind of just starts at the time something starts happening. There is no faffing around and the character just kind of living their lives. We get the introduction of the characters at a rather tense moment where they have conversations or interactions that really sets the tone for them, that introduces their internal conflict pretty much right away. And that really gets the ball rolling for me. And it was one of the things that did hook me to the series initially. especially since I was so skeptic of everything that had to do with frou-frou magic and, princes and princesses. And I used to hate old fantasy because basically the girls were all princesses needing to be saved, and the men were all boring swordsmen that had no internal life. But here we really get little tidbits of that internal life right away. And the characters that are initially introduced are very, very different and very unusual in a fantasy setting. So that's what I appreciate. And I really do think the prologue is a really standout moment, because it really gets you with the intensity and the atmosphere straight away. And it has so many beautiful little passages with the prose. And right away we see the feudal system, where a little Ponzi boy can be higher up in the social ladder than a man who has served faithfully for many, many years, who is older and wiser. And my Hoya is going on sale now, so I have to stop talking.
All right. I agree with a lot of that. But before, not to get too sidetracked, all right, Court, what's your overall feelings about it?
Oh my God, I love this series so much. There's just something about Martin's writing that is so unlike other fantasy writers to me. You're right, Will, like the pacing of it is so direct and straightforward. Like, I didn't actually know this until you told me that he used to be a TV writer. And you can really tell, like, just like Lindbergh said, from the very onset of the prologue itself, instant intrigue, like, what is going on? What is this world? Like, why? What is this like dangerous thing that is like lurking in the background? So, and what's so fascinating about with the pacing is that every chapter feels like a short story to me, which makes it flow very nicely. And it's almost like it's episodic. It's almost like you're getting smaller stories every single time, learning more about the characters in the world, to the point where when a chapter would end, I'll be like, oh no. And then I'll be like, oh, I got to go to this character. But then I'd be hooked on that character too, like literally the 2 pages in, just because like the way that Martin paces and transitions from character to character is so seamless. So seamless. So that's my overall feelings on it.
I noticed that as well. This morning I was reading, Bran falls off a tower, spoiler alert for everything. And then it immediately cuts to Tyrion, who you'd met in Jon's point of view. And you're like, it gives you a moment to catch up with the event of Bran falling, but then you're immediately, he shows you like, okay, this is the impact of what's happened there. But also by switching the perspective, you get like a kind of, again, it's a good way to introduce Tyrion, which you can do very quickly, but it doesn't slow down the plot too much. And I think a lot of what you were saying, it comes down to the fact that he did write TV, and he wrote TV in a time period when everything was episodic instead of like, one story told over a whole season. And then also he wrote some short stories that were really excellent, specifically horror short stories. Me and my co-host from the other podcast, Katie, we looked over how he wrote Sand Kings, which is a horror short story he wrote that like, and you can definitely feel the same influence and the techniques he used there in the first prologue here. Val, now, what were your opinions?
Oh, well, I wanted to say I definitely agree with you about the Tyrion and Bran chapter thing, because you could have gone into a scene about them finding him and like healing him and everyone being distraught, but that would have slowed everything down so much. And it's just such an interesting introduction to Tyrion's character. I think that we just hop in there, we see what happens through their perspective, and we just sort of glaze over it. I thought it was really, really clean. But overall, I was surprised by how easy it was to read. Like in my memory, it was good, but it's like so easy and like to read. And my ADHD brain is like all over the place, like jumping everywhere when I'm reading. And it wants to, especially in the prologue, because I don't really care about military boys and like trauma. I don't want to read about that. So my brain wanted so bad to just not pay attention. But he includes these little simple descriptors like the sable coat, or like, just little things that make it really easy to follow the through line, even though I was trying not to pay attention, that I got through the chapter like wow, I understood what happened, even though I was only paying attention, just because his prose is so clean. Like, yeah, it's great. I loved it.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I really noticed, because I mostly listen to audiobooks and prose are a little bit less noticeable there. Narrators can really make a book better or worse, and his prose here are just like the way he writes is really underrated, I think, because I've heard a lot of people say he's workmanlike with his prose, and I just don't really think that's accurate. So instead of going through it too consecutively, or yeah, consecutively. I was thinking we could do it more in terms of like topics overall. Or Lindbergh, did you want to go through it a little more consecutively? This is a little bit more freeform than we normally do. So
we can go a bit topic by topic, I suppose. I'm a bit unprepared for this because my life is chaotic.
Well, I think. Yeah, we can go topic by topic, I think, and we'll just kind of go from one spice to another. It's sort of funny. As I was reading this, I'm so used to reading it in the way that I do for like a critique chapter, where like my brain is trying to note important paragraphs each time I'm reading, and it's stopping me, and it's being like, okay, what can you say about this that is interesting, and keep that Patreon money flowing in. One thing I will notice is that I'm not going to talk too much about differences between the book and the show because I despise the show, but I do think the show sometimes is a good example of how the books are better. So like one thing I noticed about Martin is that he adds a lot of little details to characters that are a little uncomfortable. So like but it helped the characters feel real. So for example, like Jon Snow in his first chapter gets drunk and makes an idiot of himself, and he's written in a way where like he's not a miniature adult, he kind of ain't shit, you know what I mean, but he kind of thinks he is because he's a child. Or one I really noticed was in the first part of when Robert and Ned are in the crypts, and there's a part where in the show they use the same joke, which is Robert says, you know, the small people say that the king shits and the hand wipes or something like that, and in the show I think that line is actually given to Ned, but in the book Ned just doesn't laugh at it, and Robert's like, oh come on, that was funny, and Ned's like, I don't find poop jokes funny. And I liked that because that's like not as relatable as it is in the book show, but it tells you more about Ned as a character. Did you guys feel like there was like more kind of a feeling of distance between the different characters and a little bit more of an impartiality to how they're looked at? Or do you just want to talk about character moments you guys thought were interesting?
Well, regarding that scene, just because I have a similar thought, I thought it was so well characterized, with Robert being this sort of like party guy who's comfortable with a joke and uncomfortable when things get serious a little bit. And like that long flowery paragraph of him describing, you know, like the castle or whatever. And then, and, you know, Ned's just like, you know, he's just kind of like this. And then there's a really interesting quiet moment when they get to his, you know, wife's or his dead fiance's grave or whatever. And he just says like this quiet, tiny little line, and then immediately follows up with like, ha ha ha, brush it off kind of joke, which I was like, that's so real. Like, I understand their relationship just with that. Like,
yeah. Robert's kind of interesting too, I think, because it's something where you go into this book thinking he's a certain kind of dude bro, and then the book reveals, and the series as a whole reveals, he's kind of a terrible person more and more as you go. And this is just such a strong way to start you off liking the character, I think, though.
Yeah, I've been the Ned in several of my relationships. It's just so funny. Like, I've dealt with people, not necessarily like dude bros, but I dealt with people who like I've known for a very long time, or for some reason or another, like we kikied in college or whatever it is. And it's like, I'm not, no, like, I'm just not taking your shit no more. Like, no. So it's very interesting because you're right, Val, when it comes to the small glimpses of like humanity you see from Robert, and also kind of like we'll probably get into more of this later, but just the undercurrent of like vengeance that is constantly over his head, and hatred, where it's like And contrast that with Ned and his whole situation and what he's hiding. And okay, well, we won't get into that later. But like, it's just yeah.
I think it's okay to spoil the entire series.
Oh, okay,
at this point.
okay, yeah.
This is a reread. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah,
we're 20 or something years into it, so.
Yeah,
okay, I might say stupid shit sometimes because I've only read the first one. I barely remember it, so just keep that in mind.
No worries.
No, but it's very interesting. Just their dynamic. I love it a lot because it's so real. And you're right, Will. I don't think. Okay, I'll try not to mention the show too much, but I really don't think they capture quite that type of like bond, because I felt like their brotherhood even harder, even reading it. And you could really see, just even like with Ned's thoughts of how he thinks of Robert, he's like, oh yeah, I know him. I'm not gonna say nothing. Or like, really? He constantly has that think about, it's like, really? We're not doing that. No, we're not doing that. No, what are you doing? We're not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I also really like how practical like Caitlin is in compared to Ned. Like she's definitely more reasonable and logical when it comes to things. Like Ned is just like sort of stubborn, like stick in the mud, like I don't want to. And she's like, yeah, but you kind of have to.
That's something I picked up on this time as well. Though there is like a kind of like intuition about her, about like signs and stuff, because there's that whole thing with like how the wolf died from the staghorn, that like it's interesting. Catelyn to me is always a character I really liked, because like the wife of the hero is not always a viewpoint you get, and I always really liked that, you know, she outlasts Ned in the books by at least 2.5 books, even if she does eventually kind of kick it a little bit. Lindbergh, though, what'd you think of the like characters this time?
Well, first of all, Kat is so much more than a fantasy wife, and that is why she is one of my favorite point of view characters. I know, I am spinning on it. I agree with
all right,
you.
Okay, cool.
Because she is introduced first as the wife. But you should tell
the viewers that I'm a feminist, just so that they're clear. Just put in a good word.
Don't listen to Will. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. Well, anyway, quickly, we realize that Kat is so much more than just his wife. They have this bond where in the social order she is beneath him, but we can see Ned listening to her right away. She gives very measured, very thought through advice. She is more versed in the political situation as a southerner than Ned is. We see him be like, no, I want to stay home. I like the north. And she's like, no, but you can't say no to this man. He is the king now. Because Robert, spoiler, Robert in the crypts wants Ned to be his hand, because their foster father, when they were young, has just died, and he was the hand for many years, and he was very well loved by them both. And now Robert wishes to put Ned as his right-man hand, someone he can trust, someone who will tell him the truth, as he says it, because his court is full of lickspittles and I don't know what else he says, self-interested people, basically. And Ned just wants to stay home. He just likes the north. He likes the cold. He likes the snow. He's like me, you know. He likes the dreariness and the grayness. And he's like, ew, I don't want to go to the south. They have fun there. And Catelyn's like, you can't say no to this. He's a king now. Before, you were his brother. You were friends together. You grew up together. But now Robert has become a legend. He is a king. A king is not a man. He is so much more. So Catelyn immediately shows that she kind of understands this game more than Ned does. And that is such a quick and instant way of showing that, oh, Catelyn is so much more than just a fantasy wife. She is more than just the mother of all these children. She is a player. She is very intelligent.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that kind of plays into You and I had been talking the other day about Henry VIII, and Robert is very much kind of, Martin doesn't take specifically from history, but he kind of samples pieces of it, and Robert is very kind of much based off of the Henry VIII kind of was a good-looking dude, got fat, maybe was good on the battlefield, but not so much at like being a king kind of stereotype. And one of the big things about Henry VIII is like he just had too much power. That was like one of the big things, one of the reasons his court turned into such like a terror is that it's the unregulated monarchic power. And Nemorales had a point about that where he said, my problem with GRRM is that it looks more like the majority of the leader characters are painfully inept at their leading jobs. And I actually kind of think that's a point that Martin is making, is that in a feudal system, it's really kind of a roulette whether you end up with a older son who like is actually good at what he does or is a Joffrey. And like that's kind of one of the problems inherent in the series. And I think that's something we'll see more with Ned as it goes on, is that Ned is very good at being the Lord of the North. And you can see that in the later books by how loyal the North was to him in his memory. But he's not really good at being a courtier or playing the Game of Thrones. By the way, Lindbergh has flies in her house, so if you see those flitting by,
don't mind my flies. I live in Sweden, which apparently means that we have flies. You would think they would be in Florida, but no.
We do, but we have screens on the windows. We also have a bunch of lizards to eat them. Val or Lindbergh, or Val or Court, either of you want to jump on that?
Val, go ahead, Val.
It's all you.
Yes, sir.
Court, you first.
In regards to Kat, yeah, I really love Kat. I love how complicated she is. Like that's honestly, I just love complicated characters. But from the beginning, you're so right, Lindbergh, when you're talking about how she does have a voice, which is so nice. And I don't know why, but I didn't expect her to, I remember reading this book for the first time. I didn't expect her to find her voice so early or just have the voice like from the onset, because I don't know, maybe it's just because I've read quite a bit of fantasy where it's like, there's always, even if the wife or the partner, whoever it is, eventually comes into their power, they always start from a place of like subservience or just like no voice whatsoever. But from the get-go, she has a very strong voice and very strong, influence over Ned, which is utterly devastating considering what happens later. But Catelyn she's very practical, which is so interesting in contrast to Ned and even Robert. Because like Robert's like, I'm just here for a good time, not a long time. And meanwhile, Kat is like, oh my God, these fools, I just gotta I can't deal with them anymore. But no, Kat is a really interesting character, especially once we'll get into her feelings about John and how all that plays into it. But yeah, I love Catelyn.
A good way to structure this actually might be like character by character, because then I can break this video into cool chapters for people as we go. So that was so you have anything to say about Kat or ruling, Val?
Yeah, so I was looking through my notes because my brain is scattered at all times, but I just, like everyone already said, she's characterized really well, really quickly, and I really like that she has this sort of like casual disdain and bitterness about everything almost. Like she's very analytical and she clearly loves her family, but there is sort of like a hint of disdain in all of her like little interactions, more so with John, but I love how much she adores Bran, like more than anything. And like that relationship I found really fascinating. And that one scene near the end with like, of the chapters we read, at least with her and John, was just devastating. There's something about moms always gets to me, it's like, oh no, complex mom relationships. Don't look at me.
I wonder why that would affect you. I think that scene with John is a little tough, because I do think that's one place that the book errs a little bit, where having a little bit more time with the stories would be good, because a lot of readers really did not like Catelyn from that scene, and it's kind of understandable. She's incredibly shitty, and you don't get it from her perspective, where she's just utterly lost in grief. You also don't really understand the implications of her relationship with with Jon and how much that is a Ned delegitimizing her position, because
I
that's
did
just
kind
not
of
really
get that in the text.
It's there.
Okay.
It's just, yeah, I mean,
because
I
As
know
a
it
woman, I very much get that.
Yeah.
yeah.
Because she says, I knew he was going to have an affair. It's just whatever. I just, I knew he was going to take care of the child because he's noble. But he had to bring him back and flaunt it in my face.
Yeah. And install him in my castle even before I arrived, even though I am the first lady. Like she really,
it's a point of pride. Like
rather as clearly as she can expresses how she felt that Jon supplanted her. And how he is constantly there, day after day, year after year, just in her face, like,
I think that's fair. I mean, I think this may be something where we're looking at it 20 years. Because, again, this is something I just have heard so much from the fandom is like, oh, Catelyn's such a bitch. Like that kind of an attitude of it. And I think it's something where it is a little bit tough because you do come to her perspective a little bit afterwards in that scene with how sad she is. And just...
Maybe part of it is that a lot of the fandom are
hates
dudes.
women.
Okay, guys. Yes, I was going to say that too. I'm a feminist. But I do think this is something where maybe us viewing it a little bit more emotionally distant or knowing the context of the series more, or again, the conversation has sort of moved on in 20 years since when people first read this, turned a lot of people against her early on. And I think just a little bit more... context there would have been good, but again, that the plotting is so tight in this first part of the book that I could see how Martin, like, he does a lot of characterization while moving that plot football around.
Can I tie back a bit to Nemoralis's quote?
You can actually just which one is it, and I'll highlight it.
About the everyone being bad at their jobs, because I would say that the main theme of all these books is
it's ironic that it covers up your face while you're talking.
Yeah.
You're being shut down by
It's to comment on the youth of most of the characters, because that is another thing that is often talked about and criticized, is that the characters are too young. And in a lot of cases, yeah, sure, especially the women, it creates a bit of uncomfortable moments, especially around Dany. But in general, the main point that I feel like the books try to make is that look at all these people who are born into their roles. They don't have any choice, and they are put into these positions of high responsibility over lots of people and people's lives when they are teenagers. They are children. They are not equipped to handle all this, no matter how much they have been prepared. And that is a natural consequence of monarchy and that kind of power distribution. So everyone being bad at their jobs is both kind of natural, considering that they're so young. A lot of them are so young, and they were not qualified for it in any other way than that they had the right parents. And I lost my train of thought.
I will say, again, I think one of the themes of the book is how does leadership work in a feudal state, and also how, because again, we'll talk about Fagon when we get there in like 2 years. But one of the fake Aegon, that's what the fandom calls him in Dance.
Before you pull out these in jokes, mind telling the rest of us plebs who haven't read
all right. Use the acronym before actually saying.
Okay. All right.
I'll just laugh and pretend I know what you're talking about.
You got it. No, okay. So in the fourth book, there's a character called Aegon who is a fake. We know pretty much just because Martin loves his little in jokes, and you can tell is a fake heir of one of the Targaryens who was lost, and the actual idea is that he was raised by Viserys, who we'll meet later in the book, to be the perfect king. So he was raised from a very young age to have the heroic story, and he was raised by like scholars and philosophers and septas and stuff. And the point that Viserys is trying to make, or Martin is trying to make with that character, is that in a feudal hierarchy you want the best person to be king, even though it's kind of a roulette. And that's going to be a commentary on that. And that's, again, I think part of what the book is talking about is like the roulette wheel of like, maybe you get a good king and maybe you don't. What does leadership mean in a feudal society differently than it does now? Like Ned talks with Bran about how the man who swings the short sword, who orders whoever kills somebody should do the execution or whatever like that, and that is a very actually northern view of ruling, where it's a kind of deep,
passes the sentence should swing the sword.
there we go. And it's a very kind of personalistic view of leadership, and that's what Ned does a lot of the time. So, for example, later, it's mentioned too that when he would have lords come visit, he would have them all sit with the table with him, or people in the castle would sit next to him on the table, and he would get to know them. And then when you go to the south, you have a more distanced, bureaucratic method of rule, and that's one that Ned really fails at. Is that he just doesn't. Doesn't get he doesn't really understand that as much, but I've talked for too long.
Can I highlight what Ben said in the comments? Because so he's I highlight what Ben said, because he actually said something really good. I don't
you can't click it, but I can.
Okay.
Which start
he said also reading. The books are depicting.
This is Ben, you said?
Yeah, Ben.
1036.
The books are depicting a time of crisis, which presumably tests the aristocracy more than usual. A lot of the inept leaders probably would have been okay-ish during times of peace and normalcy.
Yeah, and I actually agree with that, because, whenever there's a time of peace, so it's and honestly, I think that's good for, like you said, Lindbergh, what are you doing?
I'm sorry, I'm killing flies. They're driving me mad.
It seems as though the power of the Lord of Light has abandoned you.
Oh God, no! Oh wait, I lost my train of thought. Gosh darn it!
Ben, so sorry.
I was agreeing with Ben. Yeah, I was agreeing with Ben though.
I like Ben's comment right after that too about how the negative reaction is just there's so much.
Well, so he said, I think people had a negative reaction to the scene of Catelyn shitting on Jon just because they were expecting a story where good guys uphold modern social moral values. And that's actually, I think, a good shift into that topic of the more medieval values of the character, if you want to keep going, Val.
Yeah, I was just going to say so many modern, romancy or even fantasy books these days have a very sort of injected more modern morality into them, and I think that if you're used to reading that kind of thing, it can be jarring when why is the good guy acting mean? Oh no! But yeah, it's I like it. It's very refreshing to read after all of the modern
definitely,
and
I think it's something fantasy. Where there's a little bit of it, but it's not so full on that you can't relate to the characters.
Exactly, they're relatable in there, cruelty even.
I've had a lot of people talk about how these books pioneered the age of fantasy where main characters could have real flaws and they could make really bad decisions, like this new kind of nuanced, grayish, dark fantasy, because before that it was basically fairy tale-esque, like the high epic Tolkien inspired
Sword of Truth
fantasies.
Sword of Truth was another very popular one that was pretty terrible.
The Wheel of Earth. What's the Wheel of Time? The Wheel of Time.
Wheel of Time. Yes.
The
Shannara books. Yeah, those kind of Tolkien-esque but more heroic.
I watched the Shannara TV series. It was my favorite trashy. I like really trashy, romantic sort of TV adaptions of these old fantasy books, because they just hit that, where it's garbage, but it's kind of entertaining.
I watched
100.
Oh God, that's so funny.
I used to watch 100 all the time.
It was I cried
so trashy.
All right, Court, pipe up.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
We got you.
Alrighty. Okay, so what are we moving on to? I'm sorry.
No. I was just saying, do you have any thoughts on kind of the more medieval mindset or how he handles that?
No, honestly, I just agree. I feel like I'm just going to keep agreeing with you guys because you guys are smart. No, but the thing is, I find so frustrating about I'm honestly just going to say modern writing in general, is that there's this incessant need. I don't know if this is fandoms, or I don't know if this is just writers in general, but this necessity need to like agree with a character morally and not just like depict a character. Like this kind of like, if you're rooting for somebody, they have to be good and moral. And if you're like, if somebody is a villain, then they have to be like cartoonishly evil. Or even if they're complicated, you have to like justify everything so you can root for them who is complicated. I'm like, no, you don't have to do that. And that's always been so refreshing about Martin's characters, is that you see their actions. He doesn't justify them, but he does actually give you context and understanding as to why these characters are making the decisions that they're making. And it's fascinating. And I love characters like that. We need more of that.
No, I feel like he gives the reader enough space to process it on their own and doesn't try to like tell you, you know, how to feel about this situation. Exactly. He just gives it to you like, here's what's happening. Take it.
Right. He doesn't spoon feed you, which is so nice.
I think it's definitely one of the strengths of the series, and one of the things that the multiple viewpoints helps with is giving you a little bit of a distance from them, which makes you like go, oh, okay, this is not exactly, you're not sure which ones are the author's favorite, which helps, because that is such a problem, that there is such a morality police when it comes to characters nowadays, especially with like.
I also like, I don't know if this is kind of off topic, but I really like how Martin writes younger characters, like specifically with Bran and Arya, because especially,
I was just agreeing. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, but especially like to introduce this world through Bran's eyes is very. I really like that choice because.
Lindbergh disappeared. She'll be back with us shortly, I assume.
The flies got her.
Oh no, but no, I really like how Bran was kind of like our window into this world and the Starks and the North, because there's a sort of like, I wouldn't call it childish, because it's not really like Martin has a kind of distance from the characters that allows you to sort of like see and feel what other characters are feeling, even though you're in a point of view of one specific character. But specifically having Bran be the one to basically clue us into this world, it's almost like we as readers are kind of like, oh my gosh, we're like children exploring this world and like getting to know all these characters. So I thought that was a very smart choice. And like how he writes younger characters feels true, because I find that sometimes often either younger characters are written too old or they're written too juvenile. But this one feels very authentic. And again, I like the distance that's there because it allows you to glean a lot of other things. Like we get a lot of characterization of Ned through Bran's chapter, the first chapter, which is really good. And also his dynamic with his siblings as well. So yeah.
Yeah, it characterizes him really well. I think Martin does that very well. Val, you had a line from Bran's chapter that you like, that you did message me about, which I thought was really funny, and it's true. It's a good one.
Yeah, the one where about the dog names. Was that? Yeah, that chapter in particular, I love it so much, and it's such like a child thing to be like, because I feel like. Specifically with like Rickon, I think that he's like, oh, look, this stupid little brother. I'm so much more mature than him. What kind of stupid name is Shaggy Dog? But then like when it comes to like John, he's like, Ghost is such a cool name. I wish I'd thought of that first. It's like such child logic. It's like it is. Like I absolutely would have thought shit like that as a kid. Like just like, oh man, the name's got to be perfect. Why is it so hard?
It's very fun. It's true. I noticed that with Arya as well, and again, even John, who's older but still like thinks still is immediately undercut his coolness, which helps make him feel like a child. Though Lindbergh keeps going in and out on us, so we'll see if she comes back to this point. I will say that I wish some of the characters were a little older. Martin has said before that he kind of wishes he'd aged up some of the characters, which is why they are in the show, and that's the only good thing about the show that I will ever say on the record. Especially Dany, who is 13, and I thought for sure was at least 15. Like, you know, I was making a joke with Maria the other day that like, oh, just watch, I'm going to date problematically young. And like the joke was it was hard, and it was actually kind of gross for me to joke about dating a 24-year-old. I'm 34. It's like that's so young to me. And Danny is 13, which is just that is such a child in my mind that I don't know. I don't love that. I'll just be honest. I mean, Martin is not portraying her you know marriage to Khal Drogo as like a good thing, but it's so young, and I don't think I don't think it needed to be quite that young to be shocking or effective.
Yeah, I think the chapters I had the most problems with were the Danny chapters, not just for the age ick thing, but also just because like there's sort of she is a passive character and she's sympathetic, but it's hard to find her extremely likable when she's just sort of standing there getting her nipple pinched by her brother. Like, it's just kind of gross, like not fun.
Yeah.
Martin has a thing with nipples I've never liked.
When I first read this, I don't know why, but it didn't quite hit me as hard. And I don't know if we're going to transition into Danny, but
yeah, we can transition.
The Danny chapters this time around were really hard for me to get through. Just because like, and I think you're right, Will. A lot of it has to do with her age. If she was, not saying this is even better, but if she was just a little bit older, I feel like I would have been a little bit more okay with it. And again, it's still really bad, but it's just like, considering her age, it's just, oh my God, I actually had to pause quite a few times because I was listening to the audiobook. So I was like, oh my God, this is hard for me.
And it doesn't help that they're always reminding you how small she is and how like childlike and how you can just easily lift her up.
Humongous Caldra. It's
just a little icky.
The thing about it is, and Martin has defended the books in this way. So there's two pieces of context that I think are kind of important. First is that this was written like 20 years ago before Google existed, and I'll explain why that's important in a minute. But Martin has often made the argument that like, you know, this is how it was done. It was realistic. There were child brides. And the problem is that it actually isn't historically accurate. It was kind of understood at the time period that you can't really have children very young or it will hurt like your ability to, you know, grow, or like you might be wed, but nobody's doing any sleeping with until much later. And so it's not a thing that's historically accurate, even though Martin keeps saying it is. Probably because, again, he just couldn't Google it. And now by this point, he's too old to change his mind about things. I don't necessarily think, though, that everything in a fantasy book has to be historically accurate. I still think there are certain points Martin is making with how Westerosi culture sexualizes youth and innocence. And you'll see that somewhat in Sansa's chapters more. But specifically with these, it's just I just don't feel like he's getting anything different from Danny having this happen at 17 versus happen at 13. Like, I feel like 13 is just a little too young. And I wonder if this comes from him just being like a middle-aged man. Hold on. Limburg, sorry guys, I'm lagging like crazy suddenly. It's cool.
Take a sip from my gold.
Well, if you guys had any more points about Danny, we can have Limburg.
Guys, check it out. Check out my cover.
It's cool.
It's so cool.
I was gonna get a chainmail hoodie from Shadowversity, but then I decided not to for some obvious reasons.
We don't mention him here.
You guys are back again. I can understand what you're saying.
Yay. So we were talking about Danny and how much more uncomfortable it is for us now that she's so young. And one thing I will say also is that I think, you know, discussions about consent have progressed so much in 20 years that for us it's viscerally more uncomfortable to see. We as a society have a better idea of just how wrong that is than we maybe did 20 years ago with people initially reading this. And so I think that's maybe one of the reasons, because I don't remember being this viscerally uncomfortable with it either the first time I read it. I just remember being like, oh, that's gross. But now I'm like, I really don't like reading this. But Limburg, what's your take on it?
Maybe I'm dead inside. I
I knew this was coming. Go ahead.
I'm trying to phrase this in a way where it doesn't sound terrible, but it is kind of terrible. I'm so used to women being sexualized in these types of works that initially, when I read A Song of Ice and Fire, I was like, oh, this is raunchy, but it's not that bad. And I think the reason for this reaction is that Dani is so well fleshed out too. It's like she is treated, her body is treated like this sort of public property to be commented on and put on display and touched and sort of exploited in a way that really is nasty. Sorry, Martin, I do apologize. But it's nasty. And her very empathetic portrayal kind of, for me, sort of offsets this. Because in the past, I have read so many fantasies where women are treated this way, and that's it. They're just a body to be handled by men, to be desired by men, a body to be flaunted to the viewer for their gratification. And that's the whole point of them being in the book. Whereas Dani is a very intriguing, very strong, very
there's a lot of internality
woman.
to her.
Yes.
She is one of my favorite characters, one of my favorite perspectives to be in, despite this being done to her and despite it actually being sort of gross to read, especially sometimes. Because in a way, I kind of feel like I've been her. I relate to her in a deeply personal way. So for me, maybe I'm reading it a bit differently than some other people, but it's not a clear cut. I feel like there is some passages that just feels like it's an old man, like this young body. Let me write about her nipples. Everybody's always touching her nipples. Like, dude, I get it. You want to touch nipples? Maybe touch some adult women's nipples. How about that?
Martin has such a thing.
Why don't we see Melisandre's nipples?
That is a good point. Red is her color. No, it's actually funny because twice in the books you have men who lose their nipples to somebody cutting them off.
Oh God,
Martin just likes nipples too much. Anyway.
I hate it.
Yeah, and we get a lot of very young girls' nipples described, and we get a lot of adult women's nipples that are not described. So that is a bit of an awkward thing.
Yeah,
but at the same time,
agree.
It kind of lets Dani fill this sort of for young girl readers who feel like their body have been treated this way by the world, who have been alienated and uncomfortable. Like Dani is your girl.
I think Martin has a very high level of empathy for all of his characters once he starts writing them. He's talked about this with like Sansa, for example, which he only introduced as a character to give some conflict to the Starks. And then once he started writing her, he started liking her a lot more. And I think a lot of his writing only really makes sense if you understand that his execution is a little bit better than his planning. And so he'll plan an idea that's kind of problematic, but then when he gets there, he cares about the characters. He wants to write it intelligently. So maybe the idea of, girl marries barbarian husband, whatever, is problematic. But then once he gets there, he's like, okay, but I actually want to write this sympathetically. And that's kind of, I think, some of the disconnect. There's a disconnect between the way he plans things and the way he actually writes, which explains why he's never going to finish the series, but I'm sad inside. Let's let some other women speak, because I'm like rice sand. I'm giving you guys agency.
Wait, some
feminist
other
king.
women. Oh yeah, feminist king.
Feminist
Thank
king.
You.
No.
Snaps.
Women can have independence because you let them.
Hey, empowering.
Oh my God, so empowering. No, I do like Dani's interiority a lot. Like she constantly says like, I am the blood of the dragon, I'm the blood of the dragon. It's just like her ways of finding her power in such a powerless situation. And I do like that we see, again, just like with Catelyn, I like how we see that from the very beginning. Like all of these female characters, they are already finding their power from the onset. So they're not just, you're right, Will, they're like Martin, you can tell Martin does have empathy for all of them and wants all of them to find their place and find their power in, you know, some really effed up situations. And one of the things that stuck out to me, and never mind, I'm not going to mention the show, but one of the things that stuck out to me was reading it for the first time, and especially this time, I don't know why, maybe because I've been like experiencing like loneliness quite a bit more often these days, but it's like Dany's acute loneliness is so telling in her interiority and like her desire to feel home. Like one of the things that honestly almost made me cry is when she mentioned that they closed the doors on them, and I'm like, oh my God, like my heart leapt for her when she thought that, because I'm like, that is so relatable. It's like she, outside from her home. And that's just such a larger, just a small example of like, again, this is why I love the way Martin writes inner conflict, because that's such a small example of her larger inner conflict of what she desires and what she actually wants, which is home. So yeah, I love Dany's interiority. It definitely helps with all the mess that is happening on the outside.
I think Martin also kind of has a problem where he likes to turn things up to 11 when maybe it would be a little bit more effective if he kept it at like a 9. You know what I mean? Like I've noticed this. He sometimes does this. He loves his sort of larger than life, vivid, saturated images, and it's like, okay, but maybe calm a little bit on this one aspect. Like, you know what I mean?
It's funny. Some aspects of this kind of pass you by unless you pay attention. For example, the wheelhouse that Robert and that's Cersei and the children arrives in is pulled by 17 draft horses, and it's so wide. It's got 2 stories, and it's so wide it doesn't even fit through the Winterfell's gate. And Winterfell is the largest castle in all of Westeros, aside from Harrenhal. That really says something. Like, if you really listen, you'll hear how some of these details are just so insanely exaggerated. The same goes for the armor. Like, he has the dragon. Rhaegar has the crest of the
with the rubies.
The crest. Yes, in rubies on his breastplate, and that is just, and he's going to war in this armor. That is just ridiculous.
It's totally true.
So over the top, and I think, and you're right, and he does this with Dany too. And my dude.
Maybe chill it a little bit.
But you see it in the mountain as well. Like, he's 7.5 feet tall. He's so big. He makes the Destriers look like ponies.
Oh my gosh, he would be an amazing love interest in Romantasy.
You don't even have to turn down how murdery he is. He just has to have a nice smile.
Oh, that's true.
And he's Xaden, basically.
Literally.
Ethnically ambiguous.
Ethnically ambiguous, humongous. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And Lindbergh and Court really relate with him.
He doesn't do this with men's bodies, as in, like, he likes making them big and burly, and he likes making them really hairy for some reason. But he doesn't do it in a sexual way, and you can tell that it's simply because he is not sexually attracted to men. He does not really feel what makes a man sexually attractive in the way that the Yaros does when she writes Xaden for that.
I don't agree with her on the way she finds
the name of
either.
Well, there's a point later when he's writing John Connington, who's canonically gay, and like the way he writes Connington thinking of Rhaegar, who he loved or whatever, like it doesn't really come off as an actual gay guy's gaze.
It's so straight.
Yeah,
It's
there
so
is no
straight.
emotional. You can feel that emotionally. There is
It's
no
so
sexual
straight.
attraction, and it's the same with Renly and the Knight of Flowers. Like it's all very implicit rather than actually that much backed up by interiority. But whereas when he writes women, especially very young women, you can tell how he's like, oh, her body and her perky nipples and but down
I mean,
there on her lips between
Oh
her
God.
lips.
oh God, I didn't. Okay, all
I was
right,
like,
all right.
dude,
Everyone should
don't
know that
put
Limburg.
I forgot
perfume
about
there.
Yeah.
that.
Don't
Oh.
put perfume on that place. Those are essential oils. Don't. It doesn't go there.
Oh,
pH
God, I
levels, am
forgot
I
about
right,
that.
ladies? Um, I think, and I talked about this while you were lagging off, but I do think he's trying to make a certain point with femininity being linked with youth and innocence in the books. But yeah, I think there is something to the fact that like, as much as we praise the books for feeling kind of distant and more fly on the wall and less like character wish fulfillment, there is an extent to which like, yeah, he was a middle-aged man when he wrote this, and that does kind of come through at points where he doesn't really know how to write men as being attractive besides being like large and hairy.
And I think I would actually like to say that I think it's so accepted in books that a lot of this probably happened without further reflection on his part. That is just how literature treats women's bodies in general and has done for a long time. A lot of the criticisms have come after the TV show, where people have gone from the TV show to the books and realized that, oh, fucking hell, she's 13.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's true. And again, I think this is something where like our consciousnesses as fantasy readers are so much more, there is so much more of a female constituency almost to fantasy readers now that won't let you get away with that, and you will hear more of their opinions, and then that bleeds more over into representation as a whole. That like, yeah, some of the stuff is just a little. And again, I don't like when he uses it was historical, because there's so much of the books that is ahistorical, and I think is okay to be ahistorical. I just wish he didn't defend it that way.
Yeah, historically, girls were often betrothed at a young age, but you didn't marry them at 13. And I think, in a way, he's trying with Danny to make a point that this isn't how you're supposed to do it. They aren't supposed to be married and bedded at 13. It was well known that that is not beneficial to the marriage, to the woman in terms of her fertility. Like, her body is not ready to bear a child, even if technically she could. So you didn't do it. But if you don't have that context, if you don't know all this, having her married off at 13, it just seems gross.
Yeah, and it's true. There's a good point to be made.
Gross, but because it breaks custom, because Viserys is a shit.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, I think he's trying to make a point with it, but I think you also make a good point that if his scaling this up to 11 doesn't really work if you don't know that the reality was closer to like a 5 on the scale of craziness on this kind of a thing, and you just kind of assume that this is the norm and the expected. That's kind of like just a problem often you have, and that just depends on like what crowd you're writing to and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Val, Court,
like,
do you
children were considered old enough to work at 13, but they considered of age to be adults at 16 or over, just for context.
Yeah, and it's also worth pointing out that one of the things we talked about with Catelyn, but and is mentioned in the books later, but it's just not something I think people realize, is that like it was really the woman's job to manage the household. Like, Catelyn manages Winterfell; that is her circle of power, and that's one of the reasons Jon being in that circle of power is such a problem. And so you wouldn't necessarily want to have a really young. You want to be nubile because everybody wants to be fertile back then, but like you really would want someone who could manage your household. And I think Arya makes the joke that sounds as bad at math, and thus would kind of be terrible at running a household, which I don't agree with. That's Sansa slander, but yeah, it's something that is a little bit ahistoric, I think. But
I do love Arya's chapter. I do. Like she's so funny to me. Like she's just no, but I like that. If we're going to Arya now, I
If I
really
can say
like.
one more thing about Danny
Oh,
before
go
we
for it.
move
Go
on.
for
Oh
it.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I felt like I just didn't really like being in those chapters. And while you guys were talking, I realized, I think, Will, you've mentioned this before, like reading about anxious people kind of is, you're just like, I don't want to be there. And I think that like her just being sort of there in public, not talking, just being looked at by people is just such an anxious thing for me, because I just dissociate the minute I'm in a crowd of people. Like I'm just like, oh boy, I want to go home. And it felt like I was just like, oh God, now I have to live in this person's head for this whole chapter, who feels everything I feel every time I leave the house. Like it just, yeah.
I think that's a question too. Yeah, and I think that also has to do with like Martin doesn't feel that because he may like Danny, but he doesn't necessarily identify with being a 13-year-old girl. And so like that's something where he would be like, okay, no, this is fine, but that's because he's writing it from a distance, maybe.
Mm-hmm. That's all I wanted to add.
No, I think it's a good point. Court, though, you wanted to move on to Arya?
Yeah, Arya is hilarious. No, I actually, I just always am so interested in like her relationship with Sansa and like how like that contrast is.
You have a sister, so
the whole math thing is hilarious to me. It's so raw, but it's so hilarious. No, what I find interesting is sort of like because Sansa and Marcella bond like very very quickly, and Arya, because I mean like, what was I gonna say? I find it interesting how like when they're doing their sewing and like the not the maester, who is it, the that was watching
Septa.
them, the Septa, thank you,
Septa
the Septa
Mordan.
was like, all right, you're not doing it right, like what are you doing? And like how like she throws a fit, I'm like, that is so childish but so relatable, because like I've definitely been that where like a sibling, I was not good at something and I was like, I'm just no, like, and I'm too good for this. No. So it's like she kind of has this air of she feels like she wants to see herself as like above all of these like ladylike things because she's not well good at it. And but at the same time, she still kind of wants to at least succeed in whatever way she deems success. She probably doesn't even know what it is at this point. So it's like whenever she does throw a fit, I actually feel for her because I'm like, I've been there. I know. I see you, girl. I see you. So yeah, I really like Arya's chapter, especially when like the difference between her relationship with her sister and then when you get to, of course, her relationship with John and her other brothers and how that kind of goes down. Yeah, I feel you, girl. I feel you.
You can go next, Limburg.
Yeah. Arya's introduction when they're off sewing in the tower. And it's just brilliant how first we see how the Septa berates Arya for her stitches are crooked and she's got the hands of a blacksmith. Am I lagging? Oh dear.
You're back.
That's quite a lot. Am I back?
We heard Arya Tower Blacksmith.
Oh, yeah. Well, basically, the Septa is like, you have Arya has the hands of a blacksmith. Oh, yeah. And just imagine being that little girl, hearing it, like being berated, because there is one ideal for women, and you're not it. You're bad at your one purpose, and that is really harsh to deal with when you're Arya's age. And you just see her sort of looking at Sansa's like, Sansa's good at everything. She's beautiful. She plays the high harp. It's like she got everything and there was nothing left for me. And I really like that specific sentence where she was saying that, oh, she does everything prettily, Arya thought with dull resentment.
It's a good sentence.
That is a really good sentence.
It's good writing because you never say that Arya is kind of jealous, not because she wants to be pretty, but because she wants to be liked. And it's such a good way of expressing that through just the character's internal monologue, the thoughts she tells herself, and then just her throwing a tantrum and running out of there is just fantastic. It's like, I've got to go shoe a horse. I love Arya. Her chapters are the fuel of my life. I can't wait to reread them in text form because they're so good. And that's basically
she's really good at being like, and she also feels she's one of those characters who's like a little spunky, but the author doesn't think is hilarious in the way that it's so annoying when sassy characters in books tend to be. I think Arya and Sansa are actually very interesting because they initially fall into the not like other girls kind of paradigm of like Arya is a tomboy and Sansa's kind of weak or whatever. And again, I think that's maybe even how Martin initially concepted them, but then he very kind of quickly realized like, oh, Sansa's a romance reader. That's her conceptions of the world. And wouldn't it be interesting to see that kind of deconstructed as the book goes on? And Martin himself is deeply romantic in his view of what he kind of, the ideas he likes. And so I think that's, again, a way he empathized with her. But initially they are sort of set up as opposite paradigms. But I think one important thing to mention is that even though that's sort of their initial setup, the book is always kind of very clear that being female is okay in a way that the show isn't. So one of the, in the show critical fan space, one of the big points they make is that there's one point in the show where Sansa is like, ugh, most girls are stupid. And in this one, when Jon is like, well, look how shitty Joffrey is putting his mom's coat of arms on his coat of arms, she goes, oh, the woman is important too. And like a lot of her resentment of Sansa is not that she thinks what Sansa does is dumb. It's that she, again, can't really fit that ideal. It's more about how she doesn't feel accepted by this thing than that this thing dislikes her, or that she dislikes this thing. And I think that's a nuance that gets lost a lot of the time because the broad strokes of it do kind of seem to be the not like other girls kind of trope.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, they definitely avoid that. Because I don't know if that has to do with like Martin's distance writing or if that just has to do with like maybe like just the way the interactions are and how specific they are, because like that line, like, oh, she does everything like prettily and everything's so pretty. Like you sense that animosity, but there's no bashing of womanhood or like femininity of any kind. It's just that, look, I don't mind things being I
like that it's a pink fly swatter, by the way.
It's great.
Their death will be pink.
I don't like. It's almost like Arya's like, I would also like to do things prettily because that's the only role I have in, society. It's like, this is what I am born to do, but it's like, I can't. And this entire time, my sister is the embodiment of doing everything prettily. And I just hate it. I hate it so much. Oh my God. I love Arya.
It's like, how we talk about toxic masculinity? This is sort of like toxic femininity in that that one role fuels resentment for the woman who cannot embodiment and enact this. And it's not really about femininity or women being wrong and stupid, which is another thing I do hate about the show. It's like the show, like I was saying the other day to you, Will, the show looked at Shay and thought, oh, this is a bit problematic. Let's show that she's a human being. And then they were like, and let's throw all these other women under the bus. They're love interests. They're stupid women. They don't understand themselves. And the book is so clearly not that.
The problem is that the show is written by... Sorry, no, you didn't hear me because you were lagging out, but also there's just a time lag. But no, I was just saying that the show likes three kinds of women. It likes gruff, non-feminine women, a la that's what they turned Brienne into. It likes sexy seductresses, and it likes, oh, the person was traumatized and now they're like a badass, and like it doesn't really have space for other archetypes in there, which is one of the reasons Catelyn is so sidelined in the show. She doesn't really neatly fit into one of those. And I think as much as Martin, you know, gets shit for his female characters and such, I do think he is exploring issues with them, and it isn't just like, ooh, girls are gross. Val, though, your turn.
Yeah, sorry. What are we talking about? Arya. Let's see.
Arya, femininity.
Mm-hmm. I love her chapter. Obviously, it's great, and there is just such a universal thing, like being like, you know, female presenting and just always being aware of yourself, and and she's aware that she doesn't live up to the standards, and it's just so easily relatable. And I love how much her chapter does too, specifically just because it also shows us her relationship with Jon and like that dynamic there and why they, you know, get along and love each other. And it shows us what a little shit Joffrey is. And like, you get so much work in that little chapter that is about her, I guess, but it's about so many other things too. That chapter in particular, I thought was really good at just expanding the characters and the world that we have going already.
Yeah, again, I think that's one of the places where he's able to move the plot and the characters forward and the world forward in a really efficient kind of manner. I will say another place where I think he kind of dials things up to 11 past the point of historicity, is with Jon and his
nice
bastard.
Word.
Thank you. Jon and his bastard likeness, which is like in actual medieval times, like that was hugely variable from country to country and time period to time period, but almost never is it as penalized as it is in the books, where it's like, it's really a mark of, not a pariah per se, but like it's a real problem. It's a real marginalized group. But I still think it's interesting. I very much like the way it will play into Jon's character later on. Mm-hmm. I remember the first time I read this, I remember feeling it was a little bit too much of like main character syndrome of like, oh, this is the, you know, he is the straightest, whitest male of the cast. So it kind of felt like he was being main charactered a little bit, and like, oh, he's also from a disadvantaged background that here in our world we don't find gross and marginalized. But I do think Martin later on will do more interesting things with it, and I think especially the way it drove a wedge with him and Catelyn in the series, and sort of some of the emotional blowback of that will be interesting. I'll be honest though, I'm not looking forward to Jon's chapters. I think this is the last one of his I find interesting until he runs into Ygritte. Like, his chapters in this book do interesting things from a world building perspective, but they are by their nature so far away from everybody else's point of view and what's going on, and I understand that's the point, but it's still just not that interesting to read about. And also, the wall only has dudes, and I don't really love sausage fests when it comes to my books.
I have a few chapters of Jon that are really good, though. Like when he decides to run away from the wall, and him and Mr. Aemon has that conversation about the choice you make over family or loyalty. I really love that scene, and I also love that scene where the blacksmith calls Jon a bully.
Yes, again, there's good stuff there, and even in the second book in Clash of Kings, the stuff with the incest cannibal who the Night Watch works with. I forget his name. Craster.
Yes.
Yeah, and again, I think there's a lot of good stuff in his chapters. I just don't personally like reading them. Yeah, incest cannibal is how I remember him.
He's a bit of a mopey no man.
Yeah, again, he's just the straightest, whitest of the characters, and so he feels the most
Joseph Campbell.
Yeah, he does. And I find the things that are more interesting about him you can kind of read into than are there originally on the page. Like, I once read a meta about him talking about how like Jon is actually kind of very canny with how he is uncomfortable. He feels He doesn't really trust systems, and he will almost immediately, when he goes into a new situation, try to gather allies of dispossessed people around him and essentially bind their loyalty to him in a way that's a little bit more cunning than you would think for a good character. But like, I think that's something you could read into the books. I don't necessarily know that that's a thing the books present to you. And so I find his chapters after this first one a little boring. Are there any chapters you guys aren't looking forward to reading? Like any plot lines?
Honestly, I'm with you, Will. Like, because the thing about John, like, okay, how I feel about John is honestly, how I feel about John is how I feel about Captain America MCU. It's like, I like everything having to do with the world and what you're doing. You're just boring to me. Like, that's honestly how I feel about John's like character. I like him more in the books, way more, because he does have a little bit more of a personality, whereas like they completely stripped that from the show for some reason. And I do kind of like his like interior. Like one of my favorite, he's such a dick. One of my favorite moments is when Robert walks in and he's like, "Oh, he doesn't look like a king." Like,
Yeah.
so like moments like that, kind of where he's showing like John is kind of like a little bit of an asshole. I kind of like it's sort of kind of has just like a very superiority complex to him at times, which is I find fascinating, especially when he gets to the wall and kind of like dealing with all of these people who don't have any training and things like that. So it's just kind of interesting seeing, funny enough, like somebody who's been ostracized so much, like being humbled in a lot of ways. But yeah, overall, I feel the same way, Will. Like I like his chapters for the world building and what's happening around him is fascinating, but him specifically, most times,
Yeah, he's just not my favorite character in that respect. Did we have any more big things we wanted to talk about Court and Val? Because me and Limburg, I'm sure, could go on for a very long time. So let's get your guys' stuff out of the way. Any like big topics you wanted to bring up?
I could talk about Bran forever. I love his chapters so much. I like John best through Bran's eyes. I think it's like that. What's that? John was 14, an old hand at justice. It's just so funny. Oh,
can we talk about Tyrion?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
I mean, we kind of briefly mentioned him, but we didn't really like dive into him quite a bit because I like one of my favorite conversations is what he has with John. And because Tyrion to me has always come off as kind of like Robert in a way where it's like, I'm here for a good time. Like, but at the same time, there's this sort of like deep sadness to him because of his place in his family and like, and the ways in which he relates to John. I just find their dynamic fascinating. But at the same time, like, I don't know, like Tyrion in the first book to me is, I like what he does, but he doesn't become interesting to me until way later.
He actually doesn't have a lot to do in the first book, if I'm remembering, because I think what happens after this is he gets hauled to the wall, then he gets hauled to the Eyrie, then he gets hauled into a battle. So like he's interesting, but he's not really moving the plot a lot. And I do think there are a lot of, so one thing to note that I like about the books is that he's very ugly in the books, whereas in the show he's played by the very dapper Peter Dinklage. And like I think that feels different in that in the books you would not look at him and go like, oh, he's just kind of like a short dude. You would be like, oh, wow, that's a lot all at once. And I think that gives the way he navigates through society a very different edge. And I also like that, I had forgotten this, but he is introduced to reading books. Like that's a big part of his character is how scholarly he is, which I think maybe because of the show, I kind of forgot about. And that's actually one of those things that's on TV tropes. They have the term early installment weirdness, which is early in the series, characters will sometimes be or say certain things that will change later. Yeah. And so like one of these is that like Tyrion is really good at gymnastics in this book, where like later that's just going to be completely forgotten for 3 books. And like there's little things like that. In Pentos, they talk about the Red Priests and the Lord of Light in like a slightly different way than they will in later books. And so it's clear Martin had a larger plan and maybe even went back and added things, but there's still some elements that are a little bit weird. And you can also tell where he originally thought the series was going to be a faster one. So not in this part, but in the next part, Tyrion will talk with Jon about how much like he wanted to ride a dragon and how he knows all these dragon riding books. And you could see Martin going like, okay, in 3 books, we're going to have him ride a dragon. And then it was just, the books got longer and longer and he doesn't mention it again. And then I'm sure he'll eventually mention it in Winds of Winter. But yeah, going back to Tyrion, what do you think, Lindbergh?
Oh, sorry, I was kind of off in my own little.
Yeah.
I do like the first conversation we see between Tyrion and Jon, in that he makes the comment that all dwarves are bastards, but not all bastards need be dwarves. It's just a nice way to kind of play off on that they both have stigma, they are both pariahs in society. But in a sense, Tyrion is arguably both better and worse off. Like, Tyrion is in the line of inheritance, whereas Jon is not. But in being in the line of inheritance, Tyrion will never be able to escape his ostracization from the royal society. And especially, and having the father that Tyrion does, I think he was arguably a lot worse off than Jon. And as such, he has learned this kind of wry amusement, sort of irony, to offset his deep loneliness. And the way that that kind of instantly sort of rubs off on Jon is probably, like, it's the most interesting character growth Jon has in this entire book. And it's all instigated by a short meeting and then some conversations as they make their way to the wall, obviously. But Tyrion is just one of those people that you see, he interacts with a few characters, and just from his words, he deeply, deeply impacts them for the rest of the books as we see them progress. Like, his conversations with Sansa, even though when they are in close proximity to each other later, we don't actually see them sort of reconcile and become buddies, but we see how his words still stay with Sansa as they move on. Same with Bran, when we haven't gotten that far yet. Sorry, I'm talking about things that haven't happened. But Tyrion is a very impactful character mostly through talking, and that's the point I was trying to make, that because of who he is, Tyrion would easily become one of those throwaway characters, and instead he becomes one of the most impactful characters in the entire series. A lot of people have him as their favorite, and that is through sheer personality. And I think the introduction we see in his first chapter is actually a good preview of, like, it's a good teaser for him. Like, he tells off Joffrey, who's being a little snot, and he slaps him. And yeah.
I think that's another thing about it, is that when he slaps Joffrey, train of thought, I got you. When he slaps Joffrey, there is, like, we don't like Joffrey, and so we're like, okay, cool, but, like, that is actually kind of a weird thing as an adult to do to a child. And there is a lurking ugliness in Tyrion that will come more to the surface as the series goes on. And again, it's just a thing that's not in the show, which makes him just, like, a very likable character. And I think that is one of the ways that Martin's view of marginalization, because the books really are quite a lot about what is it like being in a liminal space in society and being marginalized, acknowledges is that Tyrion is mad about how people treat him, and that doesn't make him a great person all the time. He doesn't always have empathy. He doesn't always keep that ugliness under wraps. It will kind of spike out sometimes. I think what's also interesting about Tyrion is he is a sassy character who has actually done really well, who actually is genuinely pretty witty at times and also isn't annoying. I think part of it is that the books also don't, like, the books understand that he's funny, but not everyone finds him funny, and that kind of helps a lot. Like, with even his first bantering with the Hound, like the Hound doesn't like him. The Hound doesn't think he's shit. Like, the Hound isn't also like, oh my god, I can't come up with a retort to his witticisms. The Hound like holds his own, and I think that kind of helps him feel like a real person. And then also, I think Martin is actually just a lot wittier than others.
Oops.
Yeah. Well, you back?
I'm back.
Hello.
Yeah.
Will breathed on his laptop.
Laptop is how it's pronounced.
Laptop.
I did say laptop.
No,
Exactly. Good, and keep it that way.
one of the things yeah, you're right. Well, one of the things I love about Tyrion is it's almost like he's he's like weaving a web through all the different characters. He's like a like just this guy. Like, to me, I feel like Tyrion, if he could, he would be like a world traveler and just like meeting all different types of people and just like changing their lives along the way, because he's so witty, and but he also just loves conversation, and he loves learning, he loves knowledge. So I just feel like, man, just get on a boat, go somewhere. Like, but I also understand why he wouldn't want to do that. So
no, he wanted to, actually, canonically, he wanted to go through the free cities, and his father said, I will not have the Lannister name paraded around as a grotesque.
Right. Yeah, that's true. He does that. That's
right. I remember every subtle detail.
But what's
but he missed his calling now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's not, his wit is not like shared universe. It's not an informed trait, if that makes sense. Like, it's sort of a thing that can sometimes work, because that's the problem with like a lot of authors these days, is that they assume what they're writing for their characters is funny, rather than treating like comedy as an in-universe type thing, where not everybody will find you funny. In fact, I feel like most people find you kind of annoying, and like, unless you're like super witty. But comedy is so subjective. So it's like, if you're going to do a witty comedic character, you need to balance them out with characters that are not really into that. Like, even something like Robert, like, I wouldn't call him witty, but he is sort of like jokey-ish. And Ned is just like his closest friend, his bro. He's just like,
it's just like, no, this isn't funny.
Exactly. Yeah.
Robert is
that's
the
a good
dude who
point.
laughs at his own jokes.
That's like me. We even share the
We've
cool
all
beard.
known one of those.
Okay. Lindbergh, did you have any things we missed?
Oh, tons. But, I could just really go on and on.
Well, any that are like very germane to the beginning, but maybe we won't be able to discuss later in later chapters,
Do we want to talk about the mystery?
Of
which
genre?
John, of his parentage?
The murder.
No, the murder of Bran.
John Aaron's murder.
Oh, John Aaron,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe we should talk about the inciting incident. Good idea. Who would have thought of that?
I do think it's a good way to get the plot moving and to give the book a spine of like, okay, there's tension beneath the surface. And I think that's one of the things the book does very well, is it sets up these different tensions of how things are going to go. And it helps explain why Ned would leave home, even because he really just doesn't want to. I know who killed him, but I don't think the book ever actually tells you. No, it does in Feast, I think. In Feast, it tells you who did it.
It does tell you.
But, yeah.
Well,
do you guys...
The character says it was them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, do you guys have any guesses?
It's been so long since I've read this.
I didn't finish Feast. I think Feast is where I stopped.
Fair.
I have nothing.
And not for any. I just got busy, so I couldn't like read it anymore, and never went back to it. But yeah, I actually don't know.
No. Oh,
should we spoil
that's
it?
Funny.
Lindbergh?
No. Let's let them sit on it. Put them in the freezer.
Who
Stew
was
on
it? Which of the Lannisters?
Think about it. Wake in the middle of the night and think about it. Who was it? Who was it? Was it the Lannisters? It's like the big mystery. But yeah, anyway.
Well,
that
which
is
of them,
one
you know?
thing I felt like the show completely missed the mark on is showing how just how impactful Ned and Robert's upbringing, that they were brought up together as wards of John Arryn, and that makes them kind of his pseudo sons because he didn't have children at the time, and that is why his death is what starts all of this. It's not just that the hand of the kingdom got murdered, it's that Ned has a very personal stake in wanting to find out who killed John Arryn, and I think that message was a perfect place to kind of start. It's like this. It's like A Song of Ice and Fire. The plot is Robert's huge wheelhouse, and the moment John Arryn dies is when the wheelhouse starts rolling, and we kind of just hop on just as it starts up. And the news arriving through this message to Catelyn is just a kind of an unusual delivery of the inciting incident, I feel. And yeah,
it makes perfect logical sense in world though, which is funny because at first I was like, this is kind of contrivance, and I was like, oh no, this actually kind of works for, like, this checks out with everything we learn later. And yeah, I think it's a good element. Oh, actually, one thing I did want to ask specifically Val, actually, because you're the one who hasn't read the books the most. Did you get confused by the names and stuff, or how he world built in things? Because I noticed certain things he does, like he doesn't call the Targaryens that much. He calls them like the Dragon Lords, because that's probably like an easier name for people to notice. And for me, it's kind of impossible to tell because I've read the book so many times. But like, how did that unveiling of the world? Did you get confused by names?
I didn't let myself, just because I didn't linger on it, and I assumed that if it was going to be something I needed to know down the line, it would be explained down the line. And he's very succinct with his world building moments and stuff. So I usually just sort of look at it like, okay, this is probably going to be important, and I trust that he'll tell me more about it when I need to, kind of. Yeah, it didn't bother me. If he was a worse writer, it probably would have. But yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, I was just wondering because I remember when I first read it. I actually can't remember what I thought of it when I first read it. That's part of the problem, is you kind of forget. It was so long ago. Yeah, that was back before.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that was back before Dance, so that was really a long time ago.
One of my favorite location names for in any fantasy ever is Winterfell, because it's so descriptive in its name, and it's very easy to remember. Like, I really love Winterfell as a name.
Yeah, I
Martin
really liked it too, and it has
theory about how to name things in a historical sense.
He does it so much better than everyone else. Everybody else sucks at naming things. Yeah, no, it's fine. It's no, he's so much better at it than literally every other fantasy writer. Everybody else sucks at writing things that are like both sound kind of real and are memorable.
Absolutely.
Because I'm just a shameful super fan. I have a quote that I specifically want to highlight, because it's part of that early installation sort of poetry to Martin's writing that kind of goes out with the joy in the last two books.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say, actually, if you want, you and I can stick around for another half hour going through minutia if the two other people want to get want to head out or something like that.
I do have a bit that I wanted to do before I go that I forgot to do earlier.
Okay, let's do that, and then we'll do Lindbergh's quote.
So Lindbergh always has her gorgeous horse paintings in the background, right? So I couldn't find any tape. I wanted to put it askew on the wall, but I wanted...
That's right. That's right, Lindbergh. You're not the only one who has art skills.
Check it out.
Yes.
Oh, yay.
Horse is badass.
That horse is way cooler than my horses.
That's my art. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Show and tell.
With the shades and everything.
Oh, you're so funny.
Did you want to talk more, Lindbergh, or do you want to leave that for next time?
No, it's the quote from names. Why can't I do names today? It's Ned and Roberts when they're down in the crypts. There's a quote. That is just so perfect that I kind of want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Can I? Yes. It's when they are stood at Lyanna's grave. And, people say that Martin's prose is workmanlike and crass and kind of dull.
Go for it.
Mm-hmm. Listen to this. Promise me, Ned. The fever had taken her strength and her voice had been faint as a whisper, but when he gave her his word, the fear had gone out of his sister's eyes. Ned remembered the way she had smiled then, how tightly her fingers had clutched his as she gave up her hold on life, the rose petals spilling from her palm, dead and black. That's all.
Oh. Yeah, that sentence in particular, that paragraph really struck me with just how beautiful it is. And there's a lot of those throughout the first couple chapters, moments of just real lyricism.
Mm-hmm.
There are more?
We have some crazy delay, I think.
No, I think she's lagging.
Oh. Yeah. No, because I was like, bring more. I want to hear more.
Oh yeah, no.
The flies got her.
The fly got her. Yeah.
We apparently have 5 seconds lag between us right now.
Yeah, Sweden still tries to use stones as their currency. But no, we were just saying that. Yeah, it's such a gorgeous spot.
The rose petals fell. Oh my gosh, it's so poetic. I love that imagery.
Mm-hmm. And I love the phrasing as she gave up her hold on life.
Yeah, I didn't know this was a thing people said about his prose. It's very rhythmic and poetic. I don't know.
I remember with the last stream that you guys did, when you talk about Jamie's chapter, there was I don't remember the line, but it was something about it kind of it's almost like Martin does this thing where he reverses. He almost does an object kind of grasping an abstract concept versus an abstract versus an abstract concept kind of taking out it kind of does a verse thing. I can't quite describe it, but what reread the line again.
Oh crap, I closed my book.
What is it again?
As she gave up her hold on life.
As she gave up her hold on life. I don't know what it is about it, but it just feels because sometimes I see writers a writer will probably do the life left her, almost life takes on the actual subject versus I guess her hand will be the object in this case, taking on the actual subject and almost making the abstract tangible, which is something that Martin does that I really like about his prose.
Mm-hmm. It's like he found
he really does do that.
Somehow he found a stronger verb rather than died or passed away. He found the stronger verb, she gave up her hold on life, as if it's something she has grasped in her hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's both kind of reminiscent of other things, but also original enough so it doesn't ping as weird, but it also feels more evocative. I think maybe.
Mm-hmm. I've been seeing a lot of ads for Salman Rushdie's masterclass in writing, and one of the things he says that really resonates with me is that there is a musicality to language, and that is something I feel as someone who likes a lot of poetry, is that there is a rhythm and a cadence and a kind of musical quality to certain of Martin's prose. It's like he finds that golden melody where the sentences kind of flow in a very elegant way. And it's not about using the large words or the more abstract synonyms, like he doesn't have his thesaurus open when he writes. It's really about the musicality of the prose itself.
Yeah, I really agree. It's something that I try to put into my own writing and fail, or aspire to, I suppose is a better word for it, is the way he does that. And, there are parts of the book that are like less well written than others because they're such long books, but he is able to bring that color and saturation to almost all of the scenes. And it's interesting because we're reading the book with the knowledge of how popular the series got, and it really does make a lot of sense between how nice his writing is and how quickly the plot works while also giving you the characters. That's what I was really struck by reading this section of it. Is like, I'm like, oh yeah, no, I get how this became really popular. Like, it makes sense to me that circle closes.
Yeah. One of my favorites.
It feels so mature as well. Like we are thrown into this world, and the world has existed for thousands of years. We just step into it. It's always been there. Whereas a lot of fantasy kind of feels flimsy. Like there is just this, like we're on stage, it's a theater, and there's this stage prop, these screens that show towns and villages, but we know that there's nothing really behind them. Whereas here it feels like things have been moving for thousands of years. There's real history to discover.
Yeah, I think it's very true. Okay, any last thoughts, you guys, before we head out? Next month we'll be doing the next like 12-ish chapters, which I don't know where that brings us. Probably brings us to, I don't know. But if you guys want to read along, it's 24 chapters in is probably where we'll be reading up to next time. Thank you for everyone who did join us on the chat. Yeah, any last thoughts?
No.
That was fun.
This has been fun. Can't wait for the next one.
All right. Anything last things, Lindbergh?
No. I must stop myself.
Okay. All right. We will talk to you all later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.